Who is
All
it?
right. So I'm going to start officially and say welcome. And this is a series of interviews that Linda and I are doing, sponsored by the Academy of Professional Dialogue. And we're doing these once a month with thinkers and leaders around the issues of dialogue. So welcome to all of you that are online today. The Academy is a nonprofit international organization that's focused on the work of David Bohm. And it's committed to the idea of that the world needs a dialogue, which is the name of the conference. And we're going to hold a conference in September, which will be an online conference. So we don't quite have all the details yet, but we look forward to that. Linda and I are both board members of the U.S. Academy. If you're interested in the Academy, you can go to the chat and you can see the joining instructions there. And I will mention that there's a 3 month free membership that you can use to join and give it a try. So take advantage of that if you want. And these meetings that we've had, the one with Mary Ev and the one with Patricia before this, are recorded. And if you remember, you can go and listen again to the recording so that's important. So let me say just a little bit about what we're going to do today, which many of you know, but let me just rehearse it for you. Linda and I are going to interview Tzofnat, who is on the screen up there. Wave, Tzofnat, at everybody. And we're going to interview her for about 30 minutes. And then we'll put you in breakout rooms where you'll be talking among yourselves, get acquainted first, of course, but then talk among yourselves about what you heard. And that's always the most important. People always say that's the most important part of this meeting, so that will be good. And then when we come back together, that will be about 30 minutes of time when you can say comments about what you heard and reflect on what you heard with other participants. But you can also ask Tzofnat questions about that you heard that you'd like to have answered. So at the end of that, then we'll do a checkout for everybody for the last 20 minutes. So that's our schedule. And what we want to do before I turn it over to Linda to start the interview process and to introduce Tzofnat is to ask you if you will turn your camera on. Oh, there's Thomas. Hi, Thomas.
Hello, Nancy. Thank you.
If you will turn your video on even just for a moment, because we want to take a screenshot of everybody, and then you turn it back off again. So so if everybody, if that's possible, some are coming in by phone, so that's difficult, I know. Let me give you a second to do that. Yeah, we've got a few coming in. Good.
This is useful. Put it on our website.
Yeah. Patrick, we see a blue screen for you so far.
Red screen now.
Yeah, there we go. All right, great. All right, and the others must be coming in by phone. So everybody smile, and Bobby will take our pictures. Oh, you got it?
I believe so.
All right, very good. There's Steve. Hi, Steve. All right, so Linda, it's all yours.
All right, so I'm going to give the background to our speaker. And I first want to just mention that her pronunciation of her name is very important. It's different. She taught us when we talked to her a little bit before. Her first name is pronounced Tzofnat. The TZ is like pizza. We don't say pizza, right? We say pizza, so it's Tzofnat. So I'm just going to read her bio, which is quite extensive. Tzofnat is a social psychologist and a conflict resolution scholar practitioner who has been a teacher, trainer, facilitator, consultant, and mediator in the Middle East, Africa, and the US. She earned her MA in communications from Indiana University and an MA and PhD in psychology from Rutgers University. Her doctoral dissertation is from Vrije University, Belgium, in cooperation with the Taos Institute. She is today an adjunct professor of communication, conflict, and negotiation in the professional MBA program, School of Business at Rutgers University at Camden. But she has also had positions as the head of the Dispute Resolution Center in Queens, New York City. She provided strategic and operational leadership and oversaw all services. She was head of strategy at the Ministry of Justice in Israel where she served on the national team that introduced alternative dispute resolution and mediation in that country. Now this starts to lead us into the interview. She was part of a democratic and dialogic educational reform process earlier in her career that powerfully shaped her contextual relational approach to conflict as an opportunity for learning, which she links to the changing role of leadership. So we're gonna kind of get started there. Tzofnat actually, we met her in September or August of last year. The Academy held a couple of dialogues and she came in and people were fascinated with her work with the democratic and the dialogic schools. I don't think in this country we've had that experience. So we were all like, whoa, what is that? What did you do? So if you could start off, Tzofnat. Oh, and before we get going, we would like to ask you all to, and many of you have, turn off your cameras and mute yourselves. So that'll just be Tzofnat and Nancy and I. It'll make it a little bit easier for us to interview her and not get so confused with all of our faces up here. And you can also you can take your cursor and go way up to the very top right and switch to gallery view or speaker view, I'm sorry. And that'll show Tzofnat when she's speaking, she'll take the whole center screen. So Tzofnat, could you tell us, kind of give us the background around how these democratic and dialogic schools just got started, and then if you could kind of weave in how you got involved and what your role was there.
Yeah, so the democratic schools in Israel started by Yaakov Hecht, and he had quite an experience in public schools, in regular schools, and he was actually excluded from schools. He was an ADHD, and they had all kinds of problems, and the regular school system just got rid of him at some point, and as a result, he decided to try out such schools. So the first school, and I joined in the 80s. No, I'm sorry, his first school was established in the 80s in Hedera, Israel. And I joined in the 90s, and we started actually an institute for democratic education. So this is when I joined the organization. How I got to this organization, I have my own story. I was a businesswoman in a male or dominated world in Israel. In marketing and advertising. I started actually in the United States. And although I grew up in a war zone, as a child, I experienced a few wars. I remember my mother carrying down to the shelter in the middle of the night, and all kinds of memories. I lost my best friend when I was 20 to the war. But what really brought me into different types of relationships, more peaceful, less adversarial, was the workplace. As an executive, I was in international corporations, and what I saw there and how miserable the life of people coming every day to the office just broke my heart. I was part of it and also observed it because I studied sociology for my bachelor degree, and I was observing what's happening. And I remember asking my friend, does it have to be this way? And she was an MBA, very big executive in Israel. And she said, what are you talking about? This is business. It's not, there's no dialogue here. So one day I had many perks. I just took I left the keys of my car and left everything behind and went to this institute. And this is where I was introduced to a different type of interaction, I can say. Like the student is at the center. I don't know if you want me to start talking about what are these schools, if that's the right timing.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so these schools are based on the principles of democracy, and the idea is that if a child not just learn about democracy, but experiences democracy when growing up, they will be democratic citizens as adults. So from the age of 4 through the age of 18, they just manage a democratic system. It's based on a democratic system where we have all the branches, you know, the judicial, the executive, the legislative, like everything is built around, and I can actually show, I can show how it works. Let's try to share. Maybe it will take too much time, but tell me if you do want to see it, I can show you. But there are all those branches, and kids, sometimes parents, school staff and principal, they make decisions from the smallest decision through the biggest one, meaning like how often to clean the toilet and who cleans the toilet, to what topics to study in school. Some schools, each school is different though, because democracy reflects the participants, the people who make the decisions. So obviously they are different, but there are a few principles that they all share. And in Israel, the focus was on the students. We build a supportive environment for students to flourish, to thrive, to find out what is their interest, what is the student interest, and each student has a mentor, and mentor worked with 15 students. We had a parliament that met, it depends on the school, but once in 2 weeks or once in a month. We had committees dedicated ad hoc or routine committees that decide about trips, about even about teachers, who's going to teach next year. I mean, this is the extreme that a few schools took it to. Like, by the way, there are a few schools in the United States, and one of the very first one is Sudbury School. If any of you know, it was established by Daniel Greenberg in Massachusetts, by Boston. And it was actually a model for us in many, many ways. But the freedom there, the freedom from is very extensive. And after years, I met a student, a product of the school, and it's very complex. Very interesting people come out of those schools.
So let me, you mentioned the freedom from, and I was taken by that idea. You talked about freedom from and freedom with, but I remember in reading, we had the privilege of reading large parts of Tzofnat's dissertation, not all of it, but parts of it, and in there you talked about becoming a bit disenchanted with those democratic schools, which moved you toward dialogic schools. And as I understood it, it was because the democratic schools promoted freedom from, and you were interested in this idea of freedom with. Will you talk about those two concepts for a minute?
So, okay, the broader context for this is that first, when I was there for quite a few years, in different with different roles I held. I was a senior consultant, but also I was responsible for marketing. So I had to make the idea of democratic education more and more coherent as we moved forward. And we also had the first conference, Democratic Schools Conference, an international one, we held. So I had to write all the material for it. So I was quite engaged in developing the ideas, and something was not consistent with my values, and I didn't know I couldn't pinpoint or say what it was. It took me years, really years. Only when I started writing my dissertation and got introduced to social constructionist ideas and relational ideas, all of the sudden, and the culture we live in, the individualist culture we live in, like the water we swim in, I understood what was bothering all those years. And what bothered me was that the unit of analysis, the focus was the student. And it created separation in a way in the school. So there's a paradox, because here is a democracy, everyone participates, we are all equals, and yet collaboration is not maximized. What is going on? People suffer from being isolated, left alone. So how come? I mean, it was mind-boggling to me. Today, I'm much more coherent about what happened there and what still happens, by the way, because for my dissertation, I went back to all the websites, spoke with people, I interviewed people who are still involved in democratic systems, and they still talk the same language. And all of a sudden, I see that I evolved in different direction, and maybe they have to shift a little bit toward relationships and context.
Yeah.
Let me bring you back to this to speaking specifically about the idea of from and with. Yeah.
Yeah, I can read
from or freedom with. So differentiate those two concepts for us.
Yeah, so I'll just read something very short that I wrote about that. In the society we grow up and live in where the autonomous individual is sacred. Freedom means having autonomy. To be autonomous is to have independence from others. And the absence of choice to do something is a threat to our freedom. But it makes little sense to think about freedom as independence from others if we all rely on one another for our very being. So because we continuously reconstitute each other through ongoing co-constructive relationship. So how can we think about freedom as independent from others if we are not? So that was my question, and I claim that it is an illusion because our fundamental quality of human nature is our interconnectedness. So to define what is important for me as oppositional to you is to deny the value that we bring to one another. So instead of understanding freedom around the individual, how about understanding freedom around the collective unit, the individual and the other, because we are both free if we work together. How we protect the freedom of one another. And it's really a shift to understand it this way, because we do not emphasize separation and division, but how do we make this freedom work for all of us? And we can see now with the pandemic how much this is true, right? Because if I wear a mask, it's not only for me, it's for you not to be sick. Right?
So my understanding is that moved you then toward this idea of the dialogic schools, which you saw more as freedom with. So maybe talk about those dialogic schools for a moment or two and say what they were like.
Yeah. So the big difference, and now I can say it very coherently, is that we use the same systems. We had the parliament, we had the committees, we have conflict resolution. We had all those systems that democracy has. The only difference was that we added the reflective component. So staff and kids and parents had to go and wanted to go through understanding how we position one another and how we relate to one another, and what is the nature of relationships that we hope, we desire to establish, and what do we actually do in reality, there's a gap there, like we all do, right? We want to do something, and then there's a reality, we behave a different way. And for that, we started developing conceptual models that help people rethink how they are with one another. And I do want to put it in a context that I understand now. We have to understand that we live in an individualist society, meaning that the individual is prominent. All the focus goes to the individual, and the individual is trying to protect themselves, to look good, to convey a good image. This is actually the center of our existence in Western societies, okay? So in order to even boost ourselves further, we undermine others. We undermine the other person so that we look good in the eyes of others. And that creates a certain way of looking at the self as very bounded and internal and sometimes fixed. Like, you know, we talk in psychology in terms of personality, traits. It's not really a growing, evolving person through the relationship. It's very different. So it's bounded and separated. And remember that the democratic schools were created within this culture. So as any fish, you know, you don't see what you swim in. We just keep swimming. But when it becomes very dirty and polluted, we start feeling bad.
So I was, I want to stop you just because what I was really fascinated with from your story was the shift around conflict. In other words, conflict in a democratic context, and even as you move towards the dialogic schools, even with the reflective practice, while they were coming from that sort of individualistic culture, they couldn't get out of the bounded, defended self. So conflict was not ever really a learning experience as much of it was a, you know, what we're all faced with, right?
Absolutely, and they still are. So when you talk with people even today about, let's say, the conflict resolution system, it is more looked at as disciplinary system. A punishment, it's like this is the underlying reason for, or what they do in those committees, listening to conflicts. Even mediation, when you do mediation, it's very different from doing it from an individualist point of view and a relational point of view. Because, for example, one of the biggest principles of mediation is self-determination. Think about it, which is important. I'm not saying it's not. It's very important. But is it it's the only goal of mediation? No. I think we try to create a space for people to be able to express their commonalities and differences too. It's okay to embrace differences without disagree without being disagreeable in a way. And this is an art. It's an art to do.
Well, and of course you were doing your work in the 80s, and even though you were incorporating Buber's I thou component, right? Respect of other, there was still not at that time this notion of what we now call Bohm dialogue, where we introduce skills and particular approaches to communications that does take shared meaning into account, right?
Yeah, I'll leave the discussion of the link between Bob and what I'm talking about to you mostly, but I can say, as far as I know, and I'm not I do not specialize in Bohm, but I read and I love Bohm. And one of the things he keeps talking about are the obstacles in thought, right? Talking about obstacles, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about certain perceptions and attitudes and ways of seeing the world and our connection in a way that creates obstacles all the time in individualist culture.
Right.
And in that way, it ties directly into what Bohm was trying. He was not a psychologist, right? So he didn't know to explain that these are defensive mechanisms that people do. And he was not a social constructionist. So he couldn't explain that actually it's because we focus on the individual and not on the space. So he didn't have the knowledge explaining those aspects, but he felt it. And
Well,
he expressed it.
And if he had been perhaps involved with your school, he might have helped surface those assumptions around individualistic culture that would have helped move the school towards more of a relational approach.
Maybe, I don't know. I can tell you that I keep talking with people in democratic schools today, and they are unaware of social constructionism, and they are unaware of relational approaches, and it's hard for them to even swallow what I'm saying, because they got so, one of my interviewees has been working in democratic schools for 4 decades. He has a PhD also in a different area, and he wrote books about democratic school. They get attached to it. It's so hard to make the shift.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that as a country, and in the pandemic, we're seeing it for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
And we have about 10 more minutes to do this part of the interview, Tzofnat. Can I move you to the other article that you sent us, which was around the collective dimensions of transformative learning?
It's the article you wrote on liminality and communitas.
Okay.
And in there, you say, at one place, you say, we consider collective transformation as an emergent and shared worldview shift that is grounded in shared experiences. And it made me think, and that comes out of a liminal experience. And I hadn't heard that word liminal before, but I was so say a little bit about your thinking about liminal experiences and how the collective transformation happens out of that.
Yeah, so liminal condition, it's very useful concept, because for me, it manifests our existence, because we are all the time, the liminal space is in between, right? We are in between. Something happens and it's unexpected, maybe unexpected, and we are shocked. And as an individual and the collective, and as any trauma or crisis that we experience in life, some people give up, right? And some people thrive out of that experience. And what we are trying to say is that we can use this crisis or trauma or the in-between condition to learn something new, and to do it collectively, to change the collective, what we experience with other people. And I think it also relates to conflict, right? Conflict is very painful. Think about it. And we experience it every day. When we have conflict, we suffer. I remember when I was a manager, even in a mediation center in Queens, okay? And one of my employees came to me when I was trying to talk with people about things that usually people hide under the carpet, right? They don't talk about that. And my employee looked at me and she said, it's painful. It's painful to talk about that. And she was a mediator. So it's so hard, because if there's no pain, there's no gain, right? We know that. But to operationalize that, to really live by this, by this notion, it's really hard. People don't want to go there. We either, especially in this society, you ask somebody, you partner with someone, we avoid. We don't answer.
So talk a little bit about the collective transformation that can come out of that. For instance, out of the pandemic we're having, or out of PTSD, or talk about that collective transformation a little bit.
I think if you talk about the pandemic, if we take this time that was given to us to reflect on how we have been doing so far in our relationships, and how we are with one another, and if it's good for us, it's good. But if not, and I suspect, and I've been online so much recently, you don't hear from people that it was good. People reflect and say, oh, it should be a different way. So what is the different way? We can collectively redirect our story, redirect how we are with one another. So out of this crisis, I think, hopefully, I hope we can gain a different nature, a different way of being with one another.
It reminds me of the stages of community development. You know, we start with sort of a pseudo community, and the only way we can truly get to true community is to go through that sort of emptying stage. Well, usually there's a conflict, right? And so where you have a container, which is, I think, what your article nicely describes, where you have a container of people going through a common experience together. Once they find a conflict, as soon as someone goes into sort of an emptying state or a storytelling state, they start to talk about their own personal experience in the group. That generally shifts, right? Then they start to allow the trust that needs to be there to move towards community, right? And communitas.
Space is very, the space that we we are creating to contain whatever relationship we desire to is so important. And that's the reason why I emphasize two legs to the transformation of relationships. One are the spaces that we create, the systems, the structures, like democratic schools do, and the other is what I call insight, the reflective component of where are we, where do we want to go.
But even in the reflective dialogic context, what I think you said was missing still was perhaps an emphasis on the communication skills that help people relate differently, help them speak in a way that's going to allow them to create shared meaning, right? Co-created shared meaning.
Co-creation. It's more than communication, in my opinion. It's how we relate, it's a matter of power. Okay? It's everything that I'm talking about is basically changing the structure of power in society, because without changing it, there's no dialogue really. We can pretend to have dialogue, but if people are not included and having the equal power, there's no dialogue. We can play with the concept, but I don't believe there is dialogue. So we need to shift the structure of power.
Did that happen in your dialogic schools through the reflective process?
Dialogic schools were still individualistic because their purpose was, and which is really interesting, it was to switch from I-eat relationships, a Bulgarian I-eat meaning serviceable other, or instrumental relationships, like when we approach somebody, like a teacher approaches the students, she likes the students if he makes her feel good about herself, if she's a good teacher. But if she's not, she doesn't like that student, so she doesn't take the other student as a subject. So our purpose was to move from subject-object to subject-subject relationships.
Right.
And we did some wonderful work around subject-subject relationships. We are trying to operationalize I-thou relationships. The only problem there was, and it works fantastically, it changes the life of people. I interviewed people who participate in Dialogic projects. It changes their life. The only problem that there is not enough emphasis on the relational space. It's still subject. It's not a relational state. It's what we do and what community or culture or society we create. It's slightly different question that has different implications.
So it lacked the container aspect, and it lacked what people do
have
within
the container. They do have the container, but the thought, again, it's back to Bohm. The thought about us as different, as bounded units,
yes,
is different than the collective unit.
yes, very good.
Yeah.
How are we doing on time, Nancy?
We should probably move into our dialogue groups now.
Okay.
Emeritus in the Hebrew University, and he wrote an article, an amazing article in 2000, which really influenced our work as to how to help people shift from I-it relationships to I-thou. So we have three types of relationship or respect, right? One is honor-based, right? When there's a difference in seniority, status, role, or authority, right? A teacher or a judge or a king, okay? There is I-it relationship, right? It is conditioned by the experience or by the status of the other person. The other person is different, is superior, and the focus in the relationship is being polite or nice. It's not really respect in the deeper meaning. It's like maintaining yourself and be polite to other people. And then there's achievement-based relationships. Somebody who's respected for their achievement, maybe an artist or a scholar, a scientist or a politician, and still we maintain, right? It's still I-it relationships, and it's about being nice to that other person, being respectful. And then there's a dignity-based respect, and we are not saying that all connections between people should be only dignity-based respect, but this one is what we relate to I-thou relationship. The other is fully accepted as equal human being, a whole person, regardless of their achievement or opposing views or whether we like them or not. You know, we live in a culture that liking, disliking, shapes the relationship we have with other people. So the difference is that here we're talking about unconditional relationship. No matter what you say or think, we embrace you and we enrich the human relationship by embracing you. Whereas in the other two, they are conditioned by their what they say or do. So as people, we as human beings, we are equal. So the focus is more on internal being than external being. And this one, by the way, was used in dialogic schools as something, as a tool to screen all the relationships we have, students and students, teachers and teachers, teachers and students, principal and teachers. And we used it in organizations too, just to shift a little bit the relationships toward more equal sharing power, because power shapes how we relate to one another. So this is one of the models that actually it's an eye-opener to many students and teachers and any organization, members in organizations. Wait a minute, what relationships do I practice now with this person, and what would I like to have with that person? So it helps us to move, to shift relationships into a more equal base. So
thank you for that. Once you stop sharing now for a moment, And while you're doing that, I want to read what you wrote in the article on the liminal relationships. And it's a Buber quote, and I think it fits what you just said. It says, whether spoken or silent, where each of the participants really has in mind the others or others in their present and particular being and turns to them with the intention of establishing a living mutual relationship between himself and them, which I think is a nice sort of summary of that. So let's turn to another question. Mary Eve, I don't think yours was a question, but you had a statement, I think. Would you just say your thoughts about this?
You're on mute, Marianne. Mary Eve, you're on mute. There you go.
Yes, I just unmuted myself. Okay. And we had a nice exchange in our group, and Robert, who was there, said the capacity to see what the moment is calling for is always present. And then that brought us to the fact that perhaps children have more the capacity to see what is needed in the moment and respond. And and yet they are not fully mature human beings. But as we grow older, we become full of defense mechanism. And in order to feel the field, and in order to be able to respond to this thing that connects us, we have, on the one hand, to find back the innocence of the children, but at the same time, we have to go through quite a maturation process to be able to do it again, but from a different level of consciousness. And this idea of the we space, which is always difficult to feel and to explain to others, is related to levels of consciousness. And I was wondering if the author has something to say about children, maturity, and how we grow up back to this spontaneous capacity.
Yeah, there's, they say a beginner's mind.
Yeah.
So this is exactly it. We have been trying to practice all the time a beginner's mind, like look at things in a different way from a new perspective without knowing. I think it's good also to look at couples, couples who have been together for many, many years to practice a beginner's mind. Children, I found it amazing how children, when you do give them the mic in the parliament, for example, in democratic schools, and they suggest a topic, and sometimes very young kids, you give them the place and the space, and they offer a topic, and then they have to present it. It's just amazing, how much we can learn from them, from their perspective. Our role as adults was to support them, to help them to forge their ideas and to be open to others as well. It's really hard because you live in an individualist culture, and they go back home and, they get things are not, they are hierarchical, right? With their parents, with other environments. It was gradually implemented. Not always you can consider students as equals in everything. So I know that when we worked in public schools, we always told teachers, you are the major decision makers in public schools. I'm not talking about democratic schools. It was more equal in democratic schools, but in public schools, we had to protect teachers because they were afraid of these processes. And some of them refused to participate in the processes. So we had some struggles in public schools, but it's interesting when you give the power to students, how much it becomes interesting and they are getting involved and initiating actions and being equal members of the doing of what we create in the school. But I'm not sure if I responded fully to your point. So can you?
No, it was just a consideration from what you said and what was exchanged in our group of this, the spontaneous capacity to join with others in a we space. Then we lose it and then we move to regain it. But we are bathing in an individualistic country. Whether it's called democratic or not so democratic, the focus, the worldwide focus is on individuals. So we have to relearn, and it's a long maturation process to learn to remove all these obstacles. We have to truly feel with the other.
Yeah, and build with the other. You know, in most organizations, still we evaluate people individually.
Yeah, still, yeah.
So it's a problem. You know, we want them to collaborate with others and build on ideas. Collective ideas or individual ideas that come together, but then we evaluate them individually. So there's no incentive for them to take part in an ongoing conversation or development. We have those clashes all the time because our mindset is individualistic. So how do you, it's always a struggle in our society, in Western societies. Yeah. And Western societies, by the way, influence very much other societies. So in a way, it's a paradox, but Japanese society, as much as I learn more and more, my daughter lives there, it's very individualistic in the way that the community or the collective is the individualistic. So whatever is considered good in one group, in one community, it separates from the other communities because it's us. So it's the same individualist mindset. It's very interesting.
Yeah, tribalism.
Yeah,
Peter, I think your question would be a good follow-up question if you would be willing to share that.
You've got two Peters, Peter Hill or Peter Garrett?
Peter Garrett, yeah.
Peter Garrett, okay. I was just asking one point you talked about operationalizing the I-thou relationship. And so I'm wondering if you could just say what you mean both by the I-thou relationship. You've done a bit of that with the respect model, and what do you mean to operationalize it? Because thou is a singular you. You decline the I am, thou art is singular. So the way it's described, I and thou, is something between two people. But when you operationalize something, you need a relationship with the whole, with the society and with everything in it. So I'm wondering what you mean by operationalizing I, thou, so that it's socially relevant.
I think the best to look at it is to compare it to I, it, right? So what is I, it? The other is serviceable. We use the other, right, to accomplish our goals, desires. It's a utilitarian way of looking at relationships, right? The other doesn't have an equal voice. He is an object, okay? He's not a subject, object for my desires. The I, thou is equal. It's equal relationships. It's really hard for us to implement in everyday life. I mean, we do believe in democracy. We do believe in equality, equity. You know, all those things. But when it comes to everyday life, we use other people for our well-being. So just to shift a little bit and be more aware of what we're doing when we interact with other people, because sometimes we don't see it, it's under the surface and it creates toxicity. because people feel in a second, people feel that they are being used, right? You feel, you sometimes you don't know, you can talk about it, you don't know what's happening, but you know that you are being used somehow. So operationalizing I-thou relationship is very challenging in our society, because again, the focus is on the individual in whatever we do. But I am suggesting for our well-being, even the individual well-being, it's good, you know, the whole psychology field still focuses on the self, right? How many conceptualizations do we have of the self? I mean, everything is around the self, even in social psychology. So to shift a little bit, to investigate, to learn more about how we create a relational unit, we have a long way to go. I don't know if I answered or responded to what your concern, but tell me if I'm.
I think what you've done is sort of explain more about what the relationship is. But the question I think Peter was asking was, well, then what do we do differently in life? How do we interact differently? How do we?
A bit of that, but I was also thinking many people would use dialogue and dialogue groups to create a temporary situation of I-thou amongst a grouping of people.
Right.
So the group seats as equal participants, everybody's voice is equally relevant. And so in a temporary way, you can have a dialogue to start to get what is it like to have I-thou relationships amongst a grouping of people. The question, how do you get from there to operationalizing that in a larger system? So if you accept that people are not in an I-it relationship, generally in the dialogue, you're not in an I-thou relationship. You're in a relationship of the same spirit, but with the group. So exactly. There's a bit more language required to say I don't know what the plural of thou is. I have to look it up and see. But there's the relationship between me and everyone in the same spirit. And then how do you translate that into society? That's the question I was trying to go to.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that's why I differentiate in my work between being and doing. Because when you do dialogue like what David Bohm did, he did dialogue. He was not talking about being dialogic, though he said many things about that. Being in dialogues in everyday life, that's the challenge. And today I'm not going to give you all the answers, but we did develop a few modules or conceptual models that we used for people to make this shift a little bit to being dialogic with other people, although we knew that we are operating within individualist society that pushes us back to the I-it. Like we have to struggle all the time, whatever activity or different way of doing in organizations that we do, we get pushed by this culture, the water that we're swimming in, that it's really hard to create an island. But I can give one of the, you know, we have at the end of my dissertation, I provide a few conceptual modules that are practical. One of them, for example, was the respect model that I just shared with you. This one, schools and organizations use it to screen relationships in different intersections all the time to see if they shifted back to being the kind of respect honor-based or achievement-based rather than the dignity-based that they want to be in. So it's like it helps them to watch daily actions. Okay, this is one. But then
let me stop you for a minute, because the answer to Peter's question has been put in the chat. And Robert, would you say just a word or two about that? And that's probably going to be the last comment we have before we end. But can you speak a little bit about the plural of thou?
Well, no, I was simply answering, and thank you, Tzofnat. I appreciate what you said. I can. So from my standpoint, I was simply answering the question that Peter raised. He said, yeah, I don't know exactly what the plural is, and I happen to know that ye in probably around 1300s was the plural. So that's all that was about, Nancy. I mean, I did have a sense as well that the language and terminology is very fluid. And we have reached a point where, from my experience, there are wonderful writings about the I that is we. And this is really coming out of some of the scientific research on neurobiology and how we are really aspiring to be part of a whole, because the science is telling us this is all one thing. My assumption in the dialogue groups that I have run over the last couple of decades has been that there is something that the individual is attending for, which is to find some core sense of a whole that can possibly emerge. And with that in mind, I think children have that as well. And, you know, we all understand that old concept of when the penny drops. Ah, yes, we're all on the same page at this very moment, we might say. So the ye and the thou, I think, can become conjoined. And that's when I think the flow of meaning has succeeded and occurred.
And if I can also add, one of the models, of course, we don't have the time, is the differentiation between whole and perfect. In the world of I it, or individualist culture, we are seeking, even if we don't say it, but implicitly, we are seeking for being perfect. And we constructed a model of not perfect, being a whole, meaning to containing the dark, or what, you know, the negative and the positive, the failure, the mistakes, being able to contain in our relationships everything, the black and the white, the whole, which is very different, because then our expectation is not for somebody to be the best or positive all the time. We can contain the complexity of being.
That's a very nice way to end. And thank you so much, Tzofnat, for those comments, especially the last one. I think that was really helpful. What I want to do now is just take a few minutes to talk about what the next time we're going to meet, which is on the 19th of June. And luckily, Peter is online with us, and he's going to be our guest at that time. So Peter, would you just take 3 or 4 minutes to say what you will be talking about in that interview?
Okay, 3 or 4 minutes sounds a long time at the end of a long session. But just before I do, I say I appreciate Robert coming up with the answer to the question I asked, but I quite like the translation from I, thou to we, ye, because so often it's we and ye that we want not to be instrumental, but to be genuinely engaged with each other, you know, in a human relationship. So we, ye would be quite interesting. Where years back working with David Bowen, we came across this word "wego." Have you heard "wego"?
No.
You know, ego, an individual ego,
We.
in relation to the id and so on. Wego is a collective ego. And I think there's some interesting language when you drop in some words like we, ye, and wego that start to think about how we do this collectively. But on my side, as a young man, about 35 years old, I met up with David Bohm, and it opened a chapter in my life, and one that closed when he died 8 or 9 years later. So I met him in 1983, just inviting him to come and speak at a conference. but I knew, having met him, I had to understand more. He was a very remarkable theoretical physicist. People think him, well, so I went to the time when he was voted into the Royal Society, and saw in the same book where Newton, Isaac Newton, had signed his name before. And it was a real pleasure for David Bohm to sign his name in the same book, because clearly Isaac Newton and Newtonian physics are so much a part of how we think of the world and how it works. But also he knew Einstein well, and Einstein developed relativity. When I say well, he knew him personally and in some depth. He knew Niels Bohr, who with others developed quantum theory. Well, those three are the big theories of physics and reality that we have. So this is a very interesting man. And also he proposed his own ontology, which is different from those, in order to try and resolve relativity and quantum theory. The way I think about it, in Newtonian physics, we're trying to understand reality, but somehow ignored consciousness. We were just thinking about reality. It's the same in relativity and to some degree in quantum theory. But what David did was to bring consciousness in as part of reality. It's not we're looking at reality as much as consciousness is a part of reality. So if consciousness, I mean, he began with the idea you set up an experiment, and depending on how you set it up, you get a different reality. There's a theory with light. You set it up one way and you get light's a wave. You set it up another way, you get light's a particle. But it can't be both. And so he's backtracking into the idea that consciousness is an active part of reality. And if it is, what part does it play? What's consciousness in all reality? And when you stop and look at it, consciousness affects everything around us. We live in a world that's entirely structured by our consciousness. Even if you go into space, you can see the border between Canada and the United States from a satellite, which is simply a thought that originated between some French and English, I don't know, power play, where they drew a line, and there's more agriculture in the US than the other. Anyway, I thought this chapter is an important one, I believe, in the way we've developed our own thinking about dialogue. And I thought it might be interesting to just kind of walk through the story a little bit and see what that chapter is and the kind of things we were talking about and thinking about and why we drew together groups of people. It wasn't so much about group work, it was to try and understand consciousness and how it works and what part it plays in what we're doing. And that, of course, has been a seed for much work that has gone on since then. There were others involved as well. Linda, you met and knew David Bohm, and Glenna, who worked with you, Bill Isaacs and Vicky Coates and so on. So there are a number of members who were there. But I did have a particularly good opportunity, given he lived down the road, and we could spend a lot of time working together. So that's the idea. And we could, I don't have a PhD or any models I want to bring in. It's more of a story, the story of what happened and firsthand what we thought about and discovered and how we progressed. So is that?
Well, we're very much looking forward to hearing that story. And Peter has nicely offered that also when you sign up for the interview, that you can also read ahead a copy of what he's written about that we'll put up there. So that would be nice too. So we appreciate that. Let me turn it now back to Linda to check us out.
All right, thanks, Nancy. And in case those of you don't know, Peter is a co-founder of the Academy for Professional Dialogue. So it'll be a real honor to have him talk about his experience and relationship with David Bohm. So we're going to take that opportunity to do what we often do at the Academy when we check out. I think it'll move things along. I'm going to call on Robert Sarley, who is the head of our US Academy, to start things off. Robert, if you would be willing to lead us in a reflective process, anything you'd like to say, to check out, and then you can pick the next person, and we'll just go around until we've all had a chance to give our reflections. Any aha, anything that stands out, anything you'd like to end with. And you're on mute right now.
I think Tzofnat succeeded in generating a flow that went through this meeting. And for me, the flow came alive when she started talking about liminal space, so the connective tissue that holds us all together.
Nice.
Should I pick the next one, or should we just go around?
Now go ahead and pick the next person.
Jane, you're next to me on my screen.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't have so many questions today, was more stimulated to think a lot and take that into my own work and inquiry, particularly two things. What would it mean to include rather than reject individualism? It is there, what does it mean? And then about power, very interested in power. Power sharing implies that there is this much power and we divide it up. What does it mean to be with others, and what happens to power then? I'd like to talk more about that. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to choose my colleague Eugene from my little group. Eugene.
Yeah, it's been great. It's my first time being part of this, so thank you for letting me be part of this. Yeah, for me, because right now I'm doing some studying on adult development, so I've been really thinking about, like is there a relationship between intersection between adult development and the capacity for sort of this dialogic way of doing and being, really. So that's what I've been thinking about. This is individual. Because it seems like adult development talks a lot about this this sort of ever complexification between individual and community, but sort of in an alternative way, being a more complex way. So that's what I've been thinking about that. Yeah. Okay.
Next person.
Okay. I choose Peter Hill.
Peter. And you're on mute, Peter. There you go.
Just trying to negotiate unmuting there. I think I've got that. Look, thank you very much. It's been, I'm very grateful to be part of today's dialogue, and boy, lots of thoughts, landing a bit on, reflecting a bit on relationships, especially during this pandemic. Noticing that a number of brand new relationships have emerged, and some real energy, new good energy being introduced to some long-standing relationships. So I think the power of relationship was one of the underlying aspects of our discussion today, and wow, I'm really looking forward to June 19th. So let me ask Marie-Ève Marchand to go next.
You're on mute.
Why doesn't everyone go ahead and unmute themselves now, then we won't have to worry about it.
Okay. I thank you very much, Tzofnat, is that the right pronunciation, for bringing Martin Buber back into my awareness. Is a person that made me reflect a great deal. I find that this freedom from, or the autonomous person versus the capacity of the freedom with, embodies the uniqueness of each one, plus the focus we need very much on the we. And I was also very pleased with your remark about the fact that a small we, a tribe, can become also very individualistic. So this move towards care for all rather than just care for my little unit or for myself interests me. So thank you very much for sharing, and it was good to be part of this experience. Thank you.
You can pick the next person, Maria.
Oh yes, that's right. I will pick, just a minute, I have to, Lloyd Hansen.
Hello. Well, I've really appreciated the discussion and what you brought to us today at Tzofnat. And some of the readings and experiences of cultures that have most intrigued me have been indigenous peoples. And for virtually all indigenous peoples, relationship is so fundamental. They see everything is related, so everything is about relationships. And I'm also aware of some tribal groups that have done a pretty decent job of integrating the idea of an individual with an individuated individual with a collective whole of the culture. And so it's not within human experience that we don't understand these things, and that our current understanding of the individual really started only about 10,000 years ago, which is a very small portion of human existence on the planet. But thank you very much for everyone who took part today. And let's see, I'll pass it on to Helena.
Thank you. I think what really strikes me about tonight's conversation is how, as an individual, I feel responsible for my own well-being, and how that leads to me needing to present myself in a certain way. And how the belief that my well-being is equally treasured and part of the whole would just make me show up in a different way and be able to see the wholeness of the other person more easily as well. So there's something about also recognizing the fear that comes with separation and how that entrenches the separation. And I will pass it to Linda. I don't know.
All right. I think what really stood out for me was just the profound challenge we have in our culture for all of this work we do, trying to help our clients, our children, our relationships, be able to dialogue, to be able to actually sustain in consciousness more of a co-creation philosophy of life. You know, it's a profound challenge we all face, and I really that really came out in your work. So thank you, Tzofnat. And I will pick Robert Corman.
Thank you, my friend. Well, Lloyd, I put one big ditto under what you said, and so thank you for that particular comment. But I also know that as I sit here, this is my third Zoom call today, I've had a wonderful time feeling into all the words, because we all come from, as one teacher of mine used to call it, the dust of the road. And the fact is that all the words spoken I can feel are true for me, which allows me to feel the wholeness, the imperfect, wonderful wholeness, Tzofnat. Yes, it was a very good ending. That is part of every moment, and it's all holy to me. It's both the scientific wholeness, and it's the holiness of the mystic. So for me, I love the conversation about the human experience with democracy, and that glorious aspiration. And I think David Boehm's work is up there in the very ways that Peter mentioned, as a person who was able to traverse from the scientific to the consciousness world that the mystic resides in, and that they can come together is a blessing for us to be alive at this time. I'm glad that we are able to have had this time, and I look forward to the 19th. Thank you. And I will call on, well, let's see, Victoria.
Thank you. I also really appreciated what everyone said, and Tzofnat, it was wonderful to get what I experienced as an affirmation of Buber, which I've used in my conflict resolution classes. And just as I put in the chat, just thinking of the human body as a potential way to conceptualize what it looks like for individual cells that have to maintain their own health, but always in harmony and with orchestration in response to the environment is a model that I like to think about. Like what can it be? What could it look like to have both the individual and the collective in this mutually beneficial relationship? So thank you so much for what you shared. Appreciate it. And I will call on Sarah, the SM.
Thank you. And I'm going to echo what you said, that was also very profound. And I love that metaphor. And I was even thinking that, I was like, oh my, that is such a great metaphor. You know, that interconnectedness, that everyone has, you know, every piece has their individual job, and yet they all work together. The other piece that really stood out to me were the different layers of respect and how we relate to each other, the honor-based, the achievement-based, and then at the deepest level of the dignity-based, and how the other is fully accepted as an equal human being. You know, and there's no rank, there's no hierarchy. It is just, I am here, you are here, and meeting that true I thou. And it was just such a deeper level of respect, and a completely different concept of respect that I haven't heard before. So I really do appreciate that. And this is actually my first Zoom meeting. So I know you mentioned that this is your third Zoom meeting of the day. This is my first Zoom meeting ever. And I have to say that just being a part of this has helped me embrace the sense of community. So thank you for having me on this. This has been incredibly enlightening, and I feel definitely more connected today than I have in a while. And with that, I will pass it on to Nancy. Have you checked out?
No, I think I'm the last one, so that's good. I also really was taken with the respect model, and it made me think of Malcolm Knowles. Some of you may know him. I know Mary F. probably does, who was sort of a teacher of adult learning, an early writer, and very, very respected. And I had the opportunity to bring him to the university where I was teaching, and had some conversation with him. And he said, you know, the problem with this is, he said, people are always, you know, I make a speech, and I really would like some feedback on what I've said. I want to improve my ideas and so forth. And he said, I never get it. He said, this being this sort of honored person means that I don't get, you know, I don't get feedback. I just get respect. You know, so even at that level, it made me think of it, because I remember how disgusted he felt about that whole idea that he couldn't get people to relate honestly to him at the I-thou level. Everybody wanted to relate to him at the level of the respect of the expert. So there's a downside to that as well, I think. But so I want to thank everyone for being on, and I'll turn it over to Linda to tell us all goodbye.
Actually, I don't think Peter got a chance to say his reflections. So Peter.
Oh, thank you. Good.
No Bobby.
Oh, and Bobby and Peter. So okay. Bobby, would you like to offer any reflections? She's our host. Bobby, are you there? You're on mute. If not, then Peter, why don't you take it away?
Bobby's probably having a glass of wine quietly. Very pleased to meet you, Tzofnat. Nice to be in a little group with you. I look forward to meeting you again and understanding more about your work. You have great enthusiasm, you work hard, you're bright, so it's fun to connect with you. I think it's been a very pleasant, engaging session. So thank you very much.
And I want to thank you for creating the space to share thoughts. Nothing is fixed in whatever I said. It's an ongoing, evolving thing. And I want to thank you, Nancy, and Linda, both of you, for your efforts to understand the work. It's hard. I know it's very challenging to find time, and you are volunteering, so I really appreciate that. I do want to read just a couple of lines about power is relational, okay? Excluding, because it's important for me to share with you that I see power as relational. Excluding the use of force, power is a property of relationships that, rather than quality of the individual. The ability to produce intent effects, and particularly the ability to influence the behavior of another person and to resist the influence attempts of others. A person has power over the other to the extent that the other depends on what the person and vice versa. The perspective is meaningful from a relational outlook that recognizes that an expression is meaningless if left unnoticed by the other person. So it's not that we have power. We don't have power. If I don't see your power, you have no power. That's what I'm trying to say. Power is relational. Remember that. Nobody has power if we don't approve their power. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tzofnat. Thank you, Bobby, for doing the technical end of this. We really appreciate your work. Thank you, Nancy, for being my co-host. And thank you all for coming. It's been a very enjoyable session. And Tzofnat again.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Sorry for not checking out. My speaker wouldn't work, which has got my mic attached to it.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby. All right. See you all next month.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Our pleasure.